Working Designs is the most interesting publisher to me in all of video games. They are mostly known for translating several obscure Japanese titles that otherwise wouldn't have seen a release, or at least not one that was of sufficient quality. On the other hand, in recent years it has come to light exactly how bad and disrespectful, let's say, their translations were. But we're going to look at both sides of the coin as we go through their history. It's worth noting that Working Designs was a relatively small company that had nowhere near the resources to be translating as many projects as they did, and on top of that, they used the CD-ROM quality audio in many of the games they translated to provide full English voice acting, which was practically unheard of at the time. Such reckless people getting into such a bizarre line of business should have doomed them early on, but thankfully for them, their translation of Lunar put them in the green at least for a little while, and it became their most well-known translation, so they promptly translated the sequels, and it became their staple. Their success wasn't undeserved, as the production quality of the translation was much higher than any other attempts around the time period, especially for RPGs. And at the time there was almost no way to know exactly how bad the translations were and how little they kept the spirit of the original game intact. They got a little bit reckless after Lunar and decided they could go ahead and localize whatever they wanted, everything from railgun shooters to what you're seeing on screen right here. Unfortunately, their newfound success also pushed them to make greater changes during localization, since apparently people liked what they were doing. The most infamous alterations they made were to the difficulty of each game they brought over to America. Almost all, if not all, games they brought over had a massive spike in difficulty from their Japanese counterparts. And since many of the products they dealt with were RPGs, this led to a lot of problems, enemies dealing far more damage than they reasonably should, and requiring much more grinding than any sane person should have to put up with. Even when they did translate something more ambitious like an action RPG, they accidentally made one of the hardest games of all time, that being Exile: The Wicked Phenomenon, only in America. They screwed with the difficulty on some games so hard, like Exile: The Wicked Phenomenon, that they were only barely completable, just barely. When they got their hands on a straightforward action game though, that's when they were at their worst. For example, Silhouette Mirage here got fucked up by Working Designs. This game was developed by Treasure, and as such isn't exactly on the easy side, but they saw fit to increase all of the enemy damage and add new mechanics to the game that the game could not handle because it was not designed around them. For example, now you can drain spirit energy from the enemy, and the enemy can also drain your spirit energy. The price for new weapons was massively increased, which necessitates ridiculous grinding in a game that's supposed to be fast-paced action. The gameplay of the American release barely resembles its Japanese original. But enough about the game design changes, let's get into the worst stuff, and yes, I do mean worse than completely screwing up the game design, because they dealt in games that were heavy in story. Even in their translation of the original Lunar, they included several pop culture references to American media at the time, and also changed the motivations and character of, well, several of the characters. If you've played an RPG they translated and noticed some odd humor, or in some cases any humor at all, that was probably their doing and not the original developer. Now I realize talking about this in a nebulous sense may not make it sound so bad, but just as with Silhouette Mirage, I have specific examples handy. After the success of Lunar, they got a hold of a title called Vey, and in the original version of Vey, there is a fairy with control over wind, and you use her wind powers to fly to a new continent. Simple enough, right? Well, in Working Designs translation, they saw fit to change that. Instead of having power over wind, the fairy was cursed with seismic flatulence, and you needed a special item to prevent your team from passing out around her. That's a thing. That's a thing they did. And I assure you this is not cherry-picking, changes like that are all over the place. They often rewrote the entire script, only keeping the basic outline of the story the same. Some of the most terrible examples to me are when they translated the original Exile and this game you're seeing right here, Silhouette Mirage, because both of those games had heavy religious themes. In Exile you could probably do without them, even though they were important, but in Silhouette Mirage the story is its religious influences. All of the characters are either allegories of religious characters or are reimaginings of religious characters, and The core motivation in the story is to find the Garden of Eden and reset the world and all of the people inside of it. But instead, almost all religious references are removed and only the basic outline of the story stays the same. This is the same game in which there are jokes about steroids, by the way, but apparently we're not mature enough to handle religious themes. You could argue that an easy way to cope with this is just to see the Working Designs translations as their own creations, and for a while that made sense to me because Working Designs often called these productions their games. It was Working Designs Silhouette Mirage and Working Designs Lunar. But later I found out instead that they were just bold-faced liars. Here is an actual quote from them in the Lunar Silver Star Manual. Gamers are very concerned, as we are, that the original games stay intact as much as possible. We really try hard to give the American gamer the same experience the Japanese gamer had when playing the game. And then they go on to say how sometimes they make the game better. The thing is that absolutely no one cared about any of this at the time, because how would you even find out they were screwing up the scripts this badly or changing the difficulty this much, especially when they lied about it in their translation notes. So not only did their subpar translations not get them into any financial trouble, but they actually were a significant influence on the gaming industry, and more publishers put more effort into making their translations more, sparkly because of Working Designs. Whether anyone likes it or not, they were considered pioneers in creating quality translations for a lot of Japanese media, especially RPGs. So with all of that being said, what did them in? Well, it was the dedication to their fan base. You see, Working Designs, as much as they like themselves and as much as they like the games they were translating, put their fans above all else, and they did have a lot of fans. Unfortunately, those many fans did not provide enough financial security for their over-ambitious business. They considered themselves perfectionist in their own ideas of perfection, of course, and often spent 2 to 3 years making a translation exactly the way they wanted it, and in many cases included all the extras that were normally exclusive to Japanese releases, which cost a lot of fucking money. Anyone with business sense should have seen this was a bad idea, and their most ambitious final project is what finally killed them. I am of course referring to this absolute monstrosity of a collector's edition. Now, Working Designs was known for doing extra things with their packaging, such as including 2 disc arts for Silhouette Mirage, just for aesthetic effect. They often made their cases shiny and included extras only the Japanese audience would normally get, but they went a little bit overboard with this one. And I don't just mean the collector's edition extras themselves either. Even the standard edition you're seeing right here contains 2 games inside it, because they had the genius idea to translate both games at the same time and release 2 discs for the same price as one. One of the 2 games alone would have already been their biggest project, but they sprung for both and included English voice acting and dubbed over all of the songs. So there was already absolutely no way they were going to make their money back. But on top of that, the deluxe edition was sold separately, which was even more of a money sink, because surely less people bought the deluxe edition, which cost more to manufacture. The total contents of the deluxe edition are 1 big-ass cardboard box, playing cards, a necklace, a ring, an original soundtrack, 2 game discs, and a fucking watch. Why not throw that in there too? Just a watch? Yeah, there you go. So it's really no surprise to anyone that they went under. So it was their hubris that took them down, but not for their overzealous translations, but instead for their dedication to their fan base. I want to close this video by saying that I am personally a fan of Working Designs, but that has no bearing on what they did or did not do in their history. I hope you found this video entertaining.